Hello and welcome to another Excel VBA tutorial. In today's video, we are going to be talking about a new object library. So we're going to be talking about the file system object library. Well, it's not really that one. It's the Microsoft scripting library, but we're going to be using it to interact with the file system object. And with this particular object, it makes it 10 times easier to work with things like drives, folders, file paths, extensions that belong to certain files. It basically makes the process of actually getting these files, and in some cases manipulating the paths of these files, a lot easier. So this is something where a lot of times when I see other people's code and they're trying to recreate a file path, for example, they'll start doing all this complicated stuff where they'll try to parse the file path and remove certain characters and then concatenate other ones. And I usually ask them, I say, well, have you ever heard of the file system object? And they're like, no. And so usually when I introduce it to them, they're like, oh my God, this is like 10 times easier than the manual work that I was doing behind the scenes. And so that's why I wanted to make a video on this, is because I think for a lot of people, if you're spending some of your time creating file paths or just trying to parse a file path for certain pieces of information, you can do this all with a library and it's a lot easier. So what we're going to be doing is I already have something kind of opened up. Here it is. So I have a file, or sorry, not a file, a folder on my desktop. And so it's called YouTube tutorials, and I store certain files that are related to my tutorials here. And inside of them, they have different things like files in them, or just information along that. And we're going to see how we can use the file system object to iterate over these folders, and then in some cases actually iterate through the files in those folders. So that's kind of the overall goal at this point. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be closing this out, and then I'm going to go back into my Excel application, and then we'll go into our Visual Basic editor. If you haven't already, you want to make sure that you insert a new module. So you just right click and insert. And then from here, you do have to enable a library. And so if you go up to Tools, down to References, you will see that I have something called the Microsoft Scripting Runtime library enabled. This is the one that we're going to be using. So you're going to want to go down to M for Microsoft, and then S, and it will be somewhere right around here. And once you see it, all you got to do is make sure you check that box, just like that. Press OK, and you're good to go. And then from here, you can start coding. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to create a new subroutine. We're going to call it File System. And then from here, we're going to declare some variables, just like we do with most other ones. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to declare something called a file system object variable. This will be a scripting.file system object. And then this is kind of going to be our way to actually interact with files and folders on our particular system. And so this is going to be declare variables. And then there's different types of objects that we're going to be working with. One of them is going to be a drive, so like a file drive, and so that will be a drive object. The next one will be a folder object, and so that one will be as a folder. And then we have a couple more, and so I will be going through subfolders, and so that will also be a folder object. I'm going to be working with a files collection, so that will be a files object. And then I will be working with the individual files in that collection. And so that will be individual file objects. And then finally, we're going to be working with some file paths, and we're going to be building our own. And so we're going to treat them as a string variable type. So that way we can just manipulate them and don't have to worry about any kind of issues related to that. So once you've done this, we need to create a new file system object. So we create a new file system object, and so it's going to be set that file system object variable that we declared up above to a new scripting file system object. And just like that, we now have a new file system object. Let's kind of go through one of the more things that we might want to do. So for example, maybe we want to loop through all of the drives on my particular computer, so like my hard drive and all that kind of fun stuff. And so let's do that. So let's loop through all of the drives on my system. And so what we're going to do is we're going to say for each drive in file system object, and then there's something called the drives collection. We're going to say next, and then from here, let's just print out some information. So we'll say debug print. We'll first put out the drive path. So we'll say the path to this drive is colon and then space, and then we'll put a plus sign, and then we'll put drive, and then we'll call the path property. And if you can see right here, there's a lot of different properties here. So we have available space, how much space you actually have available. We have the drive letter, the drive type, file system, free space, is ready, the path, the root folder, serial number, share name, total size, and volume name. So a lot of different pieces of information where if you have things that are named specifically, if you want to make sure that there's actually space before you put the object in there, then these are all kind of basically attributes that you can be leveraging inside of your code to make it a little bit more resilient in a sense. So that way you're only adding files that have space. You're only adding files to the correct drive that have a certain name or things along that nature. You know, usually on a personal system like my own, there's going to be 2 drives. Well, 1 on some cases, but for me, I have 2. I have 2 hard drives. But on certain ones like the network drives, you can have 5 or 10. I mean, at my work one, we have, I think on my system alone, we have like 15 drives or something like that. It's ridiculous. Okay, so let's do that. So we've got the path. Let's also look at the type of drive it is. It's only going to come back with a number, unfortunately, but we can usually infer what it means from that. And so you do have to keep in mind, because it is a number, we do actually have to convert it to a string first. So we're going to call the convert string function, and then we're going to call the drive object, and then we're going to call the drive type property. And so if I run this, let's see what we get. Perfect. And so these are my 2 drives. So I have a C drive and a D drive. And then both of these are telling me which type of drive it is. I'd have to look it up again. Well, I guess I could just look it up like this. Drive type enumeration, something like that. 2, removable. Really? I would not think that is removable. Well, I guess it's kind of removable in a sense, but I guess they're saying it's a removable drive. And there's actually other ones here too. RAM disks, no root directory, things like that. You know, I never would have guessed that, to be honest. I don't think 2 would have let me believe, but hey, it is what it is. So that's how you would loop through the drives. You know, sometimes that comes in handy, sometimes it doesn't. Something that probably will come in handy is working with a folder, for example. So say we want to work with a particular folder inside our system. So the first thing that we need to do is obviously we need to define a folder we want to work with. And this makes sense because, you know, obviously if you don't have a folder you want to work with, it's kind of hard to go to that next section. And so I'm going to go to my desktop. Where is it? And then I'm going to go here to my YouTube tutorials. And then usually from here, what I do, I just copy it like that. So I just make sure it's all highlighted. I copy it. And then from here, I'm going to say set my folder object, which I declared up here. And I'm going to set that equal to my file system object. I'm going to call the get folder method. And this one only takes a single parameter. It is a string. And it's just the path to the folder that you want to manipulate. Now, if you look right back here, you see that there are all these little methods. We'll go through some of them. I'm not going to go through all of them. Some of them are pretty intuitive if you look at them. So for example, folder exist. It's probably just going to tell you if that particular folder exists. But other ones kind of do come in handy when it comes to parsing files and stuff like that. You know, copy file, copy folder, create folder. A lot of these are very intuitive once you look at them. Normally people don't get too confused when they look at them just because it's like, oh, that makes sense, create a file. Oh, that makes sense, create a folder or something like that. So now that we've defined our folder, let's loop through, for example, all the subfolders. So in this example, maybe I want to loop through each of the folders inside of this particular larger folders. So, iterating through all the folders within the folders. So this one, let's loop through all the subfolders, something like that. And we're going to do a for each loop, and we're going to call the subfolder. I have an R at the end. In folder, and then there is a subfolders property. As you can see here, there's also a lot of different properties that are related to a folder object. So you can get things like copy, create text file, date created, date last accessed, date last modified, the drive, files, a lot of different stuff you can naturally do. The name of the folder, the parent folder, the path, the short name, the type, a lot of different things. But we want to work with the subfolders. And I'm going to say next. Okay, perfect. And let's just print out some information, right? Nothing fancy at this point. Let's just do some folder, and we want the path. Debug parent subfolder dot name. I'm gonna put this up a little bit. There we go. Debug parent subfolder dot parent folder, so the folder that it belongs to, and debug parent sub folder and dot size. Perfect. So again, just looping through all the subfolders and printing out some information. I'm going to clear all this so that way it's kind of clean, and then I actually will comment this out because we don't need to run it again. We already know what it's going to be doing. Okay. And so the first thing that you're going to notice is that it's looping through. It's giving you the name of the folder. It's giving you the parent. So this is just saying it belongs to this folder. This is the folder inside of it. And then it's telling you the size of it. So it's saying 13146, which I think, if I remember correctly, is, where is it? Kilobytes, if I remember correctly. Macro scheduler. Yeah, so that's the number of bytes. And so basically it's telling you it's about 12.8 kilobytes. So that's how you interpret that. Okay, so I'm going to cancel that one out. So that's looping through the subfolders inside of a larger folder. The other thing that a lot of people obviously want to do is they want to loop through all the files in a folder, right? That makes sense. So we're going to define a group of files. And we'll start it actually pretty simple at this point. We'll just take the folder. Well, we'll define a new one just because there's actually no files in that one. But we'll actually redefine a new folder. And then what we'll do is we'll have one that has some files in it. So maybe I want some with a couple in it, just so that, okay, here we go, perfect. So I'm gonna loop through all the files in this one. And so I'm gonna define that folder, right? So we just defined the folder again, nothing fancy. We've already seen this. And then from here, I'm gonna say set the files object that I declared up above. It's expecting a collection. So I'm going to say go into that folder and call the files collection property. And so that's going to return a collection of all the files. And then from here, let's loop through each one of those files. So loop through all of the files in the folder. And so we're going to say for each file in files. Hopefully that makes sense. Next. And from here, let's start printing out some information. So we'll do debug print. I'll probably want the file name. I might want the file path. I might want the file type. I might want the file short path. I might want the file size. There's a lot of different stuff here, obviously. And maybe I want the date last modified. Print file date last modified, something like that. I'm going to comment this out because we already know what it's going to be doing. I'm going to select all of this. And I'm going to move that up a little bit. And let's see what we get. Okay. So there's obviously a lot of files. The first one is obviously the name. This is the file path. This is the file type. This is a short path, which is just the same as this one. This one is the size. And then this was the date last modified. So it also has the time. So I haven't touched this file in a very long time, a couple months. And then it's doing that for each one of the files in here. Now, we saw how we can loop through all the files. What we might want to do next is we might want to take an individual file and get some information about it, right? So that's what we're going to do next. We're going to take an individual file and we're going to get some information, things like the name, the extension, the folder that it's in, the drive that it's in, all sorts of kind of fun stuff. So in order to do that, we need to have a file that we can work with. So we need to define a file. Makes sense? I'm going to use my file path variable, and I'm going to have that be a string. I do not have an E there. And so I'm going to set this equal to a file that I want to work with. And so let's go back to my folder. Let's work with this one. Sure, why not? There we go. So I just copy it like that. Nothing fancy. You could obviously incorporate this into the loop if you wanted to as well. It's really up to you how you want to approach it, but this is just kind of for demonstration purposes. You define a file path, then you do some stuff with it. So now that we have a file path, we should print some details about it. Things like the file name, the extension, all that kind of fun stuff. So I'm going to clear all that. I'm going to comment that out. And then let's start get printing. Debug print. Let's do the file name. The file name is, and then I'm going to do file system object. And so this is where I'm going back to my main object because all the methods and properties here exist within that object. And so the first one I want is get the base name. And so this will give me just the file name. And I'm going to pass through my file path. And I'm just going to copy this a couple times, and I'm just going to change the wording and the method that we are working with. That's all. Okay. So the file absolute path name is, do Control J. I want the absolute path name. The file extension is, so get file extension name. Get the file name. Get the name with the extension. That's how we should think about it. Get the file name with the extension. That's how we should think about it. It's kind of not intuitive at first, but hopefully you'll understand. That one's going to be get file name. And then from here, let's do a couple more. Let's get the drive. So I'll say the file is in drive. I'll get the drive. And then I will say the file is in folder. And I'll say this one, get folder. So if you can tell, all it's doing is we're just simply passing through that file path. And this is really the powerful part about this whole object library. All we're doing is we're providing one parameter and we're calling just a bunch of different methods, and it's literally returning all the pieces of information that we need. So normally we would have to parse this and, you know, look for certain characters and all that kind of fun stuff. But if you want, you can just leverage this particular library and you're good to go. You don't have to do any of that parsing. So I'll do that. Oh, my bad. We need drive name and get folder name. Get parent folder name. Sorry about that. Yeah, because the other ones might be returning the wrong image, or sorry, the wrong data type. So the file name is Python add. That makes sense. This is the file path with the extension. This is the file extension type. This is the file name with the extension. this is the drive that it's in, and this is the folder that it is in. So naturally, you could play around with this. You could, in a sense, if you wanted to, start having all sorts of conditions when you're looping through things where it's like, oh, it's going to only have this file extension. It's got to be in this folder. It's got to have this name. This is how you're going to do it. This is giving you the tools to build that logic into your code. How you choose to use it, that's up to you. But I think using these tools are pretty intuitive, and it's not too complicated to kind of wrap your head around it, because most of us work with files all the time. So if I say file extension, people go, oh, I know what you talk about there, or folder name and things like that. Usually with this library, it's relatively intuitive how it kind of works, just because we work with these type of objects all the time. Something else we might want to do is build a new path. So this is another thing. Well, we've got a file path and we got a name, for example. So if we wanted to, what we can do is we can say debug parent, and then we'll call the file system object, and then we'll call the build path method. And so this takes two parameters, a path and a string. And a name. So the name is the name of the file with the extension. So for example, if I wanted to, I could just take this, wrap it in a string, and then I can take this second parameter. Yes, I know. It always freaks out. And so all this is going to do is it's just going to join the two to make a valid file path. So just like that. So this is how I created a file path. So the last thing I'm going to talk about is how we can copy and move folders. So this comes in handy if you have some files, or you have a particular folder that you want to move, in your code or something like that. This is how we would do it. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to, sorry, my little thing fell down. We need to define a folder. So this is kind of like grabbing a folder in a sense. So we're going to grab a folder and move it or copy it. That's all. And so we're going to set the folder object equal to file system object get folder. And then from here, I'm going to grab a folder. So let me do this. So I'll get this folder. It takes one parameter. It is simply a string. Keep in mind that I don't have this / at the end, so that should be okay. At least if I remember correctly, I might be wrong. And then I'm going to call the move property, and so I have to specify where I want to put it. Let's just say I want to put it on my desktop, for example. So I want to put it, where is it? Right up here. Well, to make things easy, I will just simply copy this, and I will put it right there. And then if I run it, let's see if it moved it. It moved it. So now it's there. Perfect. What I could also do, if I didn't want to move it, is I could copy it. And so I can specify where I want to copy it. So it's identical, but the only thing I'm doing is I'm just changing the method that I'm using. So instead of being move, it would just be copy. And so I'll comment this one out, and then I'll run it again. And so it ran, and you can see that there's now a copy of that particular folder on my desktop. And so you'll see that one and that one. So they're both here. I don't need two copies of the same folder, so I'm just going to delete that one. And with that being said, that concludes this video. So if you have any questions about how to use the file system object, or you kind of just want to bounce ideas off of me and figure out kind of maybe how you would approach a certain thing, please put them down in the comments below. I'll try to get back to you. Also, if you could make sure to like the video, we always appreciate the support. And if you're not already, so maybe this is your first video that you've seen, please make sure to subscribe to the channel so that way you get regular updates as we release new videos. So what's coming up next? I'm going to try to do more Outlook stuff. I haven't done that, and I want to, because it's just one of those things that has been nagging in my head. So we're going to start looking at the Outlook object library a little bit more in depth. So I think the first one I have lined up is working with the namespace, and then we're going to work with I think individual, like I think it's calendar, and then I have email objects, things like that, something like that. So I have a couple lined up. I'm just writing the code for it right now. And then obviously I got some Python stuff too that I've got to work on. I've got to redo the Yelp API. I'm sorry about that one. I found out yesterday one of them didn't have sound on it. I was very embarrassed. And then also I have Yelp GraphQL, and then still continuing the TD Ameritrade API. And then I'm also going to start covering Word in the Win32com library. So we're going to see how we can use Word with Beautiful Soup and certain other libraries. So hopefully that's useful. So thanks again for watching, everybody. We will see you in the next video.